So good morning. My name is Nicolay McKay, and I am the section chief of the home program team. I've been with HCD for approximately 18 years. In most of those years, I have spent in some capacity working with or overseeing the home program. In addition, I have approximately 7 years of CHOTO experience prior to my employment with the state. I would like to introduce to you today Jay Cortez, who is our home program activities manager. He's been with the department for quite a while, almost as long as I have, and he manages an awesome team, which he's going to introduce to you. Jay?
Thank you, Nikki. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for showing up and showing interest in our program. And I wanted to just tell you briefly about myself. A lot of you know me, some of you don't. I've been in the home program since March of '07, so 17 years. And the last 4.5 years, I've been the home program manager over program activities. Before that, I was a representative in the home program. And with us today are 4 of our 5 team members. Tony Noya couldn't make it today, but we have, and if you, good, they're all on camera. So we have, and maybe just wiggle your hand, even though your name's there. Vicky Belanco, Jamie Gonzalez, Paul Monson, and Selena Castilleja. We call her Cece. Maybe you do too. So what's great is we've had stability in our team. They've all been with us for 2 to 3 years, Tony a little longer. So it's our pleasure to serve you, and we're just really glad for your interest. So let's roll on here. So before we start, I want to point out and emphasize that we will happily give technical assistance consultations to you. And what that means is meeting on Teams, even if it's just to talk and see each other's faces, or we can do show and tell, and you can show us your screen, whether it's, hey, I'm having problems with eCivis, with your app, logging on, or anything. We're here to help along the way. And the way to get a meeting with us is just to email homenofa@hcd.ca.gov. Every email that comes there goes into my work inbox, so I never ever miss something that comes in, and I make it a point to get to those timely, usually same day, couple hours if I can. And so email us and say, hey, we want to meet, and then we'll just call you. Probably your rep will call you and say what times are good for you. They look at our calendar. We set up a Teams meeting time for half hour, 1 hour, whatever you would seem to need. So please don't neglect to take advantage of that offer by us. So let's start out with a little poll to see who's here and how much experience you have in home. I think there might be a stray question about developers. You can ignore that one if we forgot to pull it out. But Nikki, could you kindly launch that poll, or tell me if I should try to launch it? I've got Nikki as the co-host here.
I do not see a button on mine to launch a.
Okay, well, let me.
Oh, wait, maybe.
And you guys, please bear with us, everyone. We're still getting used to Zoom. This is actually our first year of having Zoom webinars rather than some other. Here you go. She launched it. So please take a couple of minutes, everyone, and fill that out. I'm putting it here front and center for you to see in front of the slide. Maybe this helps. It might confuse because you probably have one of these already up on your screen, but go ahead and fill that in, and this will kind of show us all how it's progressing as you fill it in. We'll share it in real time. It's really important for us to know who our audience is. And so, yeah, if you have development experience, that's great. It's not really the focus of what we do. We kind of did a one-size-fits-all poll for our 4 NOFA webinars this year, so that's the reason. And so right now we've got 70% have answered. I'm going to give it just a little longer because it's nice if everybody can see the big picture clearly about who's with us. We're up to 75%. Going to give it just a little longer. I'll give it till 2 minutes. So we've got 10 more seconds, and then I guess we'll just roll with whatever results we have, and maybe I'll keep an eye on the poll. Okay, we're at 2 minutes. We're at almost 80% participation. So let's see what we've got. The organizations, I guess we won't need to share that, but that's more for our purposes. But so we've got 15% of you are developers, 60% almost are cities or county representatives, no Native American entities, which is good because they have a separate webinar this afternoon with us, which will look a lot like yours. We have 8% of you are consultants, and 20% of you are other, which is interesting to me. So I think when we look at who are you with, that will sort of make sense of what that means. And years of experience with home. So we've got about half of you have less than 1 year of home, which makes me glad that I sprinkled in a lot of Home 101 here, and that's on purpose. Good kind of introduction for some of you, good reminder for others of you. 1 to 3 years, 22%, so almost a quarter. 3 to 5 years, 15%. You see, 5 to 10, 3%, and more than 10% of you have been doing business with home for over 10 years. So that's awesome. So we'll be telling you a lot of stuff that you know, a lot of you, but think of the people who've never heard it. So thank you for bearing with us as we go over some things that are awfully familiar to you. So with that, I'll stop sharing this poll. And I'll share results just because it says I should. And then you saw them, so I'm stopped sharing. And I'm going to close that. So Nikki, is it showing like it should now in the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Very good. So today's agenda. There will be a couple breaks, at least one break. But anyway, we're going to do a program overview, then program requirements part 1 and 2, and then application scoring and evaluation will be the last part. And so let's just roll from there. But this copy of this PowerPoint, before the questions come in, will be posted on our website, and this recording, a link to this recording will also be posted on our website. I think I saw something where possibly if it can't be posted on our website, then it probably will just have you guys request a recording of it, and we can send you a link with a password. So one way or the other, you'll have access to the recorded PowerPoint, or for your colleagues, peers who couldn't make it and need to see this, and the PowerPoint itself. So as a matter of overview, we estimate that out of our roughly $120 million home NOFA, about 29.5 million in mostly 22 and 23 federal funds, because HUD gives us money every year as a pass-through, basically, mostly pass-through. Your share, it's essentially you get 40% of the big pot, and then, or programs does, and then cities and counties and non-tribal get 80% of that 40%. Tribal gets 20% of that 40% available, made available to them as targeted funds. So doing the math on that, nearly $30 million available, which is more than we would ever have in a single NOFA based on HUD's funding levels. So double NOFAs are nice because they tend to not be competitive. So people who apply tend to get awarded in these kind of NOFAs, at least on the program side. So no promises, but it's a good time to apply for that reason. And as a reminder, the home program always must serve low-income households. That is to say, they earn at or below 80% of AMI, which means area median income. I'm going to just start saying AMI from now on to save time and breath. We also serve, of course, lower income stratas like very low, which would be for home defined as 50% or below AMI. So what's home there for? It's to increase the supply of affordable housing. That mostly happens through, on our project side for rental, new construction, and subdivisions. That's how you increase the supply. But we also expand home ownership opportunity, mostly through our program side. That would be down payment assistance, and improve existing housing. That would be owner-occupied rehab, and also to assist renters with initial and monthly costs, and that's TBRA. So that's just a matter of overview. We'll talk about that all in detail in here. Very important to be aware of our deadlines. So the application submittal period is as follows. It says here February 14th, 2024 through April 9th. And the reason why it doesn't say February 12th, which is what our NOFA said, is it's possible that we'll be releasing our eCivis application documents a couple of days later than planned. We will see, but I'm putting the later date here just so that people aren't going to ask, well, why isn't it? I can't get in. It's February 12th. It's Monday morning. So that's your heads up for that it could come a little later than advertised. Speaking of the eCivis application portal, I will point out that many of you might not have been here for our last NOFA 2 years ago, and that's the first time that the home program entered eCivis and had you go into eCivis to apply for funds. So some of you are going to have to get acquainted with it, especially if you've not worked with our CDBG side, who's been using it for several application cycles, I believe. So this is the link, and you will have a copy of this PowerPoint. This link is on our website right now under the NOFA tab, to eCivis to go in and register or log on and submit applications starting, let's say, the 12th or the 14th. We also have posted on our website the eCivis Grant Management System User Manual, which would be very helpful to you to understand and navigate eCivis. And also there's an external user webinar that we've kept from, I'm going to say 2 or 3 years ago, available for you to watch too. So all that said, if you get into eCivis and you struggle or have questions, ask us for technical assistance via a meeting, via an email to the Home NOFA inbox. Okay, so what's new this year? And this is going to be kind of, on the slide, we see the 2019 NOFA as a contrast. I'm not really mentioning the NOFA from 2 years ago, which was our last NOFA. So I'm kind of contrasting with what 2019 looked like versus this year's instead of last year's versus this year's. So let's look at that. So in 2019, they were paper applications. The last NOFA cycle, they were in eCivis, and this year they're in eCivis. So that's a difference for many of you. Paper or electronically submitted, but outside of eCivis in 19. Okay, in 19, we had a $500,000 maximum, and but we would award up to $1 million for the best recent spenders. Last year, we had so much money in the NOFA, it was more than that, even a little more than this year's. And this year's, we've kind of found the middle ground where your maximum is 500,000, and that's going to be what most of you can apply for. But and we'll see this in a later slide, if you've been what I call a good or great, let's say a great or exceptional recent spender, you could actually have an application amount that could be up to $1.5 million. Next thing is, at that time, 2 cycles ago, only cities, counties, and CHOTOs could apply for home program activities, whereas now Native American entities may also apply for program activities if they're federally recognized tribes. And we have this AB 1010, which allows us some flexibility to also allow them for as developers for projects, which is not what this workshop is about. By the way, we already had our projects workshops, and if any of you need to also do that or instead do that, they will be posted on our website as soon as we can get them posted. But I can also if you email the Home NOFA inbox, I can provide you with a link to the recordings for those webinars. Okay, and then sorry, I clicked in the wrong place. 2 NOFA cycles ago, there was no bonus general admin available for TBRA. It was the same as owner-occupied rehab and first-time home buyer. It was just 2.5% off the top. So if you could apply for $1 million, that would be 25,000, for example. Off the top, that goes into a general admin bucket. What we did the last NOFA cycle is bring back something that we had done last 8 to 10 years ago, I think, which was providing bonus tenant-based rental assistance admin. So the bonus this year is 7.5% extra general admin tied to TBRA dollars. So for every 100,000 of TBRA you're applying for, a full 10% of that goes over to general admin. So $10,000 rather than the customary 2.5%. So I hope that makes sense. What's also new is, this is quite new, hot off the presses actually. So previously, I've had this question come up several times in the NOFA inbox in the last 2 days. Do we have to turn in an authorizing resolution with the NOFA application, or can it come later after award? The answer is, as always, with home, you have to turn it in, submit it, upload it actually into eCivis with as part of your home application. So that hasn't changed. However, you used to always be able to have the city council or board of supervisors specify any position at the city or county who could sign the home standard agreement. But the new development is that there are state regulations that say that the mayor must sign the home contract, and really all contracts on behalf of the city, unless there's a city ordinance that allows another position to sign the city's contracts. So when you see our authorizing resolution template, it's going to point that out very vividly that that's the requirement. And when you're in eCivis filling out the app, it's going to ask you, do you have an ordinance that allows someone other than the mayor to sign state contracts? And if you say no, then it's going to say, then basically make sure you put the mayor as the person who can sign the home standard agreement. If you say, yes, we do have that, it's going to say upload your ordinance. So that makes sense, right? So that's obviously something we needed to point out here, even though our forms are going to lead you into that. Used to be that Chodos could have a 3-year certification from us and submit another application without for a NOFA using their current Chodo certification package, but now Chodos must, and this is consistent with the home final rule, must always submit a Chodo certification application with any NOFA application for programs or for projects. And that way we are certifying that Chodo to do that kind of program, or on the other side of home, project in that geographical area where they have a presence and the necessary experience. That's the reason. Here's another bit of a shift. So traditionally, we've always checked with the state controller's office to verify that you did submit your required single audit. But now that the state controller's office doesn't really maintain a list, at least on their website, as to who has submitted, we need you to either upload your exemption letter that you sent to the state controller's office. Basically, we didn't spend $750 or more, so we don't have to do a single audit, or upload a copy of your actual single audit you did. So that's a biggie. And also, any outstanding findings in the audit report may impact the ability for us to award funds. Nikki, I'll stop for a second and ask you if there's anything I should know about going on in the technically or anything else before I plow on.
No, keep going.
Okay, thank you. So what's still in effect? Homebuyer education training. So this is a good time to remind you that tomorrow we have our mandatory first-time home buyer resale recapture freeze workshop, which is going to lead to restoring everybody's first-time homebuyer program as quickly as possible after some necessary steps are taken. So speaking of first-time home buyer and that issue, this slide's reminding you that when you're doing first-time home buyer loans with program income or with grant funds, there's mandatory home buyer education training that has to be facilitated by a HUD certified housing counselor who is employed by a HUD certified housing counseling service. And that became effective over 2.5 years ago. Okay, so there's a link there that would help you find out more. I will point out that all of it can be done remotely. You can outsource that, most would. And there does have to be a one-on-one aspect of that education training. Also still in effect. So let's talk a bit about program income requirements, reporting changes. This is not brand new, but it's going to be news to some of you, I think, especially those who don't get my quarterly reminder to get your quarterly program income reports in. So the reporting change is, in the past, you did not owe the home program at home.hcd.ca.gov. Yes, that's right. So you submit reports. It used to be only when you had an active home contract in the program or projects side, or both. The shift was, now that HUD expects us to timely enter into IDIS any expenditures of home program income or program income admin, then we need everybody to, in any quarter in which they spent, not had, not received, but rather spent program income, to give us a quarterly program income report and supporting documents. So a drawdown request if it's a drawdown request in either case, but also if it's a project setup and completion report, or for owner-occupied rehab, sometimes just a setup report, or later just a completion report, because that can happen in multiple stages. So that's what you need to know about reporting. In terms of committing program income, that changed about, time flies, I'm going to say 5 years ago, where HUD basically said, hey, you no longer have to spend program income the moment it's on hand, or recaptured funds, but rather, if you receive it in the present fiscal year, you're not obligated to commit it via a signed agreement with a borrower or a tenant. You're not required to commit it or spend it until the end of the following fiscal year. So basically, we always look back at your last home annual performance report, and we see what your closing balance was. And so shortly here, if you submit a grant draw to us, we would be looking at that and saying, well, we need to look for evidence that they've actually spent that $500,000 that they had on hand July 1st. So that's the nature of it. We got to make sure you have a firm plan to get what's about to be old program income out the door on time by June 30th, or committed. So we can welcome your later questions about that. Let me see what I had about recapture. Living documentation. I don't think I have anything about the recapture requirements. Sorry. Okay. Still in effect, we can disencumber all or part of your grant if you've got an unreasonably low expenditure going. We've not enforced this, but our contracts do give us that ability and that right to do so if we're inclined to do that. We're obviously not going to do that in situations where there's extenuating circumstances and you just reasonably need more time. Applicants are still responsible for informing us if the authorized rep changes along the way, so that we know if we get a drawdown request, we're looking for a supporting form to say, yes, that's the name of the current city manager, or these days it's probably going to be it won't be the mayor. The mayor has to sign the standard agreement. In the resos, going back to that other slide, you can designate someone else other than the mayor to sign home drawdown requests and such. So we've actually expanded the reso to reflect those two different kind of signatory and authorized rep roles, just to clarify that. So if the roles change, might be the name of the mayor, might be the name of the community development director, or whatever, whoever's authorized on the reso to sign things, you need to keep us updated, or else it's going to slow things down on reimbursements. Also, if you want to shift, what it means by contract changes is if you want to shift money between, let's say, your first-time home buyer and owner-occupied rehab in your contract, you need to ask us and we need to say yes, and generally we'll say yes, so that we can adjust our system and then let you adjust your financial system to reflect where the money is earmarked for or able to be spent at this point. So finally, still in effect is when you're giving us the application and you're showing us your reporting history, you're going to need to feed back to us copies of the emails that show where you submitted it, when you submitted it, what you submitted for each of the quarterly and annual reports that you were responsible to submit during the period in question. Okay, some more things about still in effect. All program income and recaptured funds must be in an interest-bearing account, and the interest earned is program income, which is good news. And so that's per the home final rule change back in 2013. So it's been 10 years since they released that. So that's been true a long time, but it's still true. Also, again, still in effect, as always, if you're exempt from the requirements of the single audit from 2 CFR Part 200.512, meaning your jurisdiction spent less than 750,000 of all federal funds, not just home, not just ones tied with HCD, but all federal funds. If it's less than 750, then you should give a copy of a letter to the state controller's office saying we're exempt from filing. And that's a copy of a letter that I think you also give to the federal clearinghouse. Nikki, correct me on that if I'm wrong. But the new requirement, while we're on still in effect, reiterate, is you will be uploading your single audit if you did have to submit a single audit. Remember that one is due March 31st for last fiscal year. They always give you 9 months to get that in after the end of a state fiscal year. So let's launch into program requirements. This is part one, eligible applicants and activities. So eligible home applicants consist of cities and counties. That's most of you or most of whom you guys are representing. CHODOs, community housing development organizations, which are special nonprofits, which meet certain criteria to be designated, certified by the state of California as a CHODO, who can therefore have access to what HUD makes a 15% set aside of our HUD grant is reserved for CHODOs. And so they kind of have a separate competition, if you will, that can be an advantage. And it also, so CHODOs can apply, and then Native American entities that are federally recognized tribes can also apply. So what you don't see on here are for-profits, and you don't see developers, and you don't see public housing authorities. So cities and counties. Now, with cities and counties, let's dig into that, what that means. You could apply as a city or county if you're on NOFA Appendix A, which is on our website right now, and it'll be one of the documents found in eCivis if you want to access it there as well. And the reason why any jurisdiction is on NOFA Appendix A, it means that they're not a participating jurisdiction. That's us, not you. You're not a PJ, we are. PJs are those whom HUD allocates formula funding every year. So if you're not a PJ, and you're not part of a group that goes to HUD for home funds, like as part of an urban county agreement or part of a home consortium, then you'll be on Appendix A and thus eligible to apply with us for home funds. So I welcome your questions later. You can put them in the Q&A if some part of that didn't make sense. And I must point out, if on Appendix A you feel like, wait a minute, we don't have a path to home funds except through the state of California, and we're not on Appendix A, you got to let us know about that, and we'll look into it immediately. We did a lot of due diligence this year to try to make sure our Appendix A was perfect. I must point out that if you're a CHODO and you want to apply, you can work only in areas that are associated with state home eligible jurisdictions. So it goes back to Appendix A. So you could not operate in the city of Sacramento, for example, or most of the county of Sacramento, with one exception, I think Elk Grove, as a CHODO, because they're not on our Appendix A. let's talk about home rules. This is a new slide, and I don't know why I didn't have this on here before. I've done a lot of these over the years. So here we are. Let's talk about the big three. Home has three kinds of limits that will affect you and your ability to run out one, two, or all three of these activities. So we have income limits, which are published yearly by HUD, and there's no exceptions possible or challenges possible for the income limits. So again, 80% of AMI as a maximum, and HUD publishes those, and we just reformat them in a user-friendly way and put them on our website every year. Then you have the home ownership value limits. HUD also publishes those every year. However, they're by county, and they're large data sets that can tend to be a little older, 500 plus units, or I think 5 years, whichever's greater. If I remember right, they're meant to represent 95% of area median income, median sales price. Median means half of the sales were higher and half were lower. So HUD publishes that. Oftentimes, those limits don't work for cities within certain counties, and sometimes they don't even work for the county itself, who operates in the unincorporated part of the county through us. And so every year after we update the home limits on our website, we announce that, and we essentially say, if these don't work for you where you're at, then you can give us a value limit waiver request. And that's pretty much as simple as giving us 3+ months worth of data and 100+ sales of the same type. So single family detached, for example, is by far the most common requested. And if it makes sense, we used to turn those over to HUD and say, this is the exception limit that we want them to have for a year. And I think essentially HUD has approved us to let those be good through roughly the end of September every year, because by then they'll be about a year past when we get HUD's approval, and it will have given you the opportunity to repeat that process in a year if the HUD next set of HUD value limits don't work for you as well. The idea is to get your new exception limits in place every year before your old ones expire. So we negotiated with HUD to get that. So keep that in mind. You're not stuck with HUD's published value limits, and we try to make that very clear every time we announce the posting of HUD's new value limits. Roughly every June is when that happens, or July. The third limit of the three is home maximum per unit subsidy limits. So let's talk just a second about how much those are right now. Sorry, I meant to silence my phone. I'm gonna make sure that doesn't happen again. My bad. That's what you don't want to have happen while you're presenting, so pardon me for that. I never make that mistake in the movie theater. Okay, so the current subsidy limits, and this represents the most home funds you can put into a unit, whether that's a first-time home buyer down payment assistance unit or an owner-occupied rehab unit, would be, the current limits are 173,000 roughly for a studio, so a 0-bedroom, 312,000 roughly for a 3-bedroom, and 342,500 almost for a 4-bedroom. Therefore, generally, you didn't really have the need to subsidize someone heavier than that. So oftentimes these won't be a problem for you, the subsidy limits themselves. In high-cost counties, doing a reconstruction or something, yes, I guess, or a huge down payment assistance, because homes are not, these numbers can actually get in your way in certain areas. But for a lot of you, that's not really much of an issue. So those are the three limits. Let's talk about three main federal overlays that impact us here in program activities. One is NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, and we've got a couple slides on that. So we'll talk about that later. Another one is, so that's federal environmental review, in addition to your normal CEQA responsibilities. Procurement, so this kind of gets into admin subs versus subrecipients. I'll talk about that a quick second. If you're going to hire an administrative subcontractor, competitively. Usually they're for profits, but then you have to follow the guidance in the next bullet point, 2 CFR Part 200, which gets into procurement, conflict of interest, and ultimately documenting every federal dollar you spend, whether it's for activity or soft costs or general admin. Okay, so procurement, if you're going to get an admin sub, you have to do a request for proposals. You have to jump through certain hoops, meet certain requirements. If you're going to hire a subrecipient, which is a nonprofit or another governmental agency to assist you with your program, then you're not subject to procurement rules or RFPs. You can just do a subrecipient agreement with your subrecipient of choice. Biggest difference is subrecipients cannot flat fee bill you for their services. They have to bill you time and expense, just as you must bill us, so to speak, time and expense. There's no flat fee arrangement for state recipients nor for subrecipients. So that's why I put it in this slide. Is it's really important that everybody understands that. And again, the third one is just knowing that you're subject to everything in 2 CFR Part 200 except where it makes exceptions for things like the home program. So that's called the Uniform Administrative Requirements. So eligible activities. This is just the overview slide, not the details slide. So simply put, it's first-time home buyer, which comes in 2 flavors now, used to be 3. The most popular flavor by far, and almost all we've seen over the last, since I've been here, acquisition only. In other words, down payment assistance. The second one we used to offer, but HUD's made it clear this is not home eligible, acquisition with rehabilitation. And then the third one is infill new construction. So we'll get into the first one and the third one on a subsequent slide. There's also owner-occupied rehabilitation and tenant-based rental assistance. There's the nicknames for them all, which kind of makes sense when you look at them. Please note that CHODOs can apply for only first-time home buyer and not even for down payment assistance. So we'll get into that in a minute. In fact, just about now. So the first of those on that list you just saw, first-time home buyer, acquisition only. So this is, again, for down payment assistance and closing cost assistance. And what I wanted to comment about this is it helps eligible home buyers purchase, sorry, my notes are on the right-hand screen, so I'm looking over here. Helps eligible homeowners purchase affordable homes that are standard. Let's talk about that a second. Standard as opposed to substandard. So no health and safety or code issues. I think we get into that in a later slide about property standards. For first-time home buyer loans, gap assistance can include customary eligible soft costs, so appraisal, escrow fees, things that are always associated with purchasing a home. Then yes, those can be charged to the borrower, as long as the combined loan to value doesn't exceed 105% of the sales price or appraised value. And this is worth you knowing. We make no distinction between down payment and closing costs because really all of the money from us and from the borrower just go into the same big pot, right? So I don't care how you label it. This is down payment assistance. This is gap assistance for, making their first mortgage affordable, et cetera. We just call it down payment assistance. So it's a little bit of a misnomer to just call it down payment assistance, which is what most people call it. Okay. I want to also point out that you can't put these down payment assistance funds for acquisition only into a home assisted subdivision. That's our project side, for a couple of reasons. There's federal and state rules that prohibit adding more home funds during the home affordability period, which might have already been triggered on that project that may have been completed with home funds a year or 2 ago. And also there's concerns about exceeding the maximum home subsidy limit by adding more money to that unit that was kind of funded on the front end with home funds. So keep that in mind. And home loans, the home loan itself cannot be more than the first mortgage amount. So in a loose way of speaking, it can be about up to half the sales price. But technically, you got to look at the first mortgage amount and say, we can be as much as that, we can't be more than that. That really does open the door up to a lot of people because Now they can afford twice the home they could have if they didn't have a silent second mortgage. And we'll get into that in a minute about the terms of the home loan. So the main point, I skipped bullet 2, but the whole biggest point of this is, a lot of people, yes, need help with a down payment on a home. They haven't saved up the money, but even more people, I think, or just as many people have this issue where I can't afford a first mortgage for 300,000, where homes cost, a little over 300,000 here. So our loan simply fills that gap and gets their first mortgage reduced to a size. That's the only thing they're making payments on, after all, over those 30 years. It gets them into certain debt to income ratios. And in your program guidelines, we suggest minimums and maximum ranges for front end and back end. So with and without installment and car payments, in other words. And so your whole job is to get them into the correct size first mortgage payment, including taxes, insurance, HOAs, things like that. Mortgage insurance, if there has to be mortgage insurance. There shouldn't be mortgage insurance on non-FHA ones, because you're usually more than 20% of the deal. So that's just an overview of first-time home buyer and what it's all about. Naturally, you can't exceed the home per unit subsidy limits. That's a given, but it's worth mentioning. A change in 2021. We used to put in our program guidelines that you have to start with our template, and this was a non-negotiable, and it basically said everybody can get a maximum of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, unless there would be overcrowding in the home. That could look like siblings sharing a room, things like that. We decided to make that optional and let you leave it in the guidelines if you want, or remove it from your program guidelines if you want. So if you want to let folks pick out a 4-bedroom that's within your home value limit, that's fine. But it has to be reflected in your home program guidelines for first-time home buyer. The home must be standard, not substandard. We talked about that, pardon me. By the way, if it has any problems, then prior to closing, the seller would need to fix the issues to make it into a standard home, and the seller would have to pay for it. Yes, that could be renegotiated purchase price or something, but basically, the buyer can't take the risk of actually paying out of pocket for a home they don't yet own and possibly might not end up owning. So that's why the seller's got to pay for any needed repairs. The buyer can't buy a home that has any of those kinds of issues at close of escrow. And of course, again, the home price must not exceed, the sales price, in other words, must not exceed the current home ownership value limit in your county or your exception limit at the time. And again, CHODOs are not eligible for down payment assistance only. Why? Because they're not in the required role that a CHODO has, which is owner or developer. Let's talk about infill new construction. I would call this our by far least popular, least applied for activity. I've seen in 17 years a small handful of these and very few, if any, actual results. So proceed with caution if you decide to do this. And so this looks like building homes within built-out neighborhoods. In other words, filling in empty lots, usually between homes or at the end of a block. What it is not about is expanding the edge of the city or the edge of the neighborhood into the nearby field and things like that. It's within a built-out neighborhood. So again, it has to be scattered sites with no more than 4 dwellings within 2,000 feet of one another due to NEPA. So what that means is if you built more than 4 within 2,000 feet, even if they're not right next to each other, that would trigger an environmental assessment, which is beyond what most of you are wanting to do, and which is never otherwise required in our world of single-family program activities. The application, if you apply for infill, must document the availability of grant funds or building sites currently owned by the applicant if costs will exceed the appraised value, which oftentimes it doesn't pencil out if you don't have a development subsidy or some building sites owned by the city or county or CHODO. CHODOs can apply for this. There's a lot of extra application forms for that, by the way. I think we'll get into that later. So now let's roll to our second of the 3 things that we do in program activities, which is owner-occupied rehab. So this says that the property must be, of course, owner occupied. And that means at the time they're applying, not, oh, we don't live there, but once this house is rehabbed, we'll move in. That's not owner occupied rehab. It has to be owner occupied at the time of your written agreement, basically home funds commitment to the household. The only exception is if something burns down and they're displaced, there is an exception for that. But usually we're not talking about burned down homes. It must be the primary residence, so not just owner occupied, but as their primary residence. It must start out as substandard, and it has to end up as being standard. Substandard, like it says here, means a health and safety and or code violation, not just a water heater strap, not just a smoke detector or lack of a radon detector, okay, or a carbon monoxide detector. It's something more substantive than that. So it has to start out with something. Lots of times it has to do with roofs or leaky windows, damaged flooring. There's a lot of things it could be, and then be made into a standard unit. In this program, general property improvements are limited to 15% of the overall project cost. That includes borrower funds in the deal, not just your loan or Cal Home money or CDBG money you put in to the same project with home. It's not a home improvement program. It's not a home remodel program. It's a home rehabilitation program. So that implies you're fixing things that are either deficient or maybe, you're fixing other things like weatherization, energy, and things like that. So keep that in mind as an overview. If it's ever discovered that a home is so bad and the types of issues it has, lots of times it could be a foundation issue and such, if it's cheaper to actually tear down and replace the building than to rehab it, then we have a management memo on our website that addresses what we call a home test for reconstruction. So there's a form and a process. Both are on our website and under resources. And so you have to get our advance approval before you go down that road of a reconstruction and make your case that it's indeed cheaper to tear down and replace than to, which means reconstruct, than to repair it. Third activity that we get into is tenant-based rental assistance. So this provides rental subsidies, and fasten your seatbelt here. There's a new wrinkle here. We used to just say beyond 30% of the adjusted household income. And that's true for the certificate model of this because we let you choose a model. The other model is called voucher, and it lets them basically downgrade or upgrade versus your rent standard and pay as little as 10% of their gross income with a minimum dollar amount, or up to 40% and no more of their gross income if it's voucher. So voucher is more flexible about kind of giving you headroom for them to go into a little more expensive housing compared to your rent standard, or to save money and they get the savings, you don't. So the target is generally having people pay 30% of their adjusted income towards rent and non-included utilities. Second point, this program not only provides monthly rental subsidies to make it affordable, but security deposit assistance. All along here, it's been up to 2 months under the home final rule as a maximum. Twice the rent could be the maximum security deposit. We have a law going into effect in our state, July 1st, that says the landlord can't exceed 1 month rent in terms of the security deposit, with some exceptions. So please keep aware of that if you're going to run a TEPA program where people are starting after July 1st. This also can provide utility deposit assistance, not alone, but with one or both of the two things we just talked about in the first 2 bullet points. It's very rare to see evidence of utility deposit assistance. Obviously, that would be a lot more likely in rural areas. So things to keep in mind about TBRA. And again, this is kind of my home 101 opportunity for you guys, sorry. The rent plus the utility allowance, what we call gross rents, can't exceed your rent standard. So we have you put in your TBRA program guidelines, our rent standard is X for a 1-bedroom and X for a 2-bedroom and so forth. And you're going to also make a note, this is One asterisk would be 90% of the HUD fair market rents that are published. Two asterisks would be 110%. So that's kind of your minimum and maximum that you can set your rent standards, and they're strictly tied to the HUD fair market rents. At least 90% of your households must be at or below 60% of AMI for TIBRA. So it's special in that way. That means the other 10% of the households you serve could be between 60 and 80% AMI. So it's meant to dig down to lower income households. This program has a little bit of an administrative lift to it because you must document rent reasonableness, basically putting comparables on paper for each and every assisted unit, kind of like an appraiser does when you buy a house. And they do that, for the benefit of either you and or the lender. So it looks a bit like that out in a much, much simplified form. Just how much are non-assisted units that are comparable to this one, considering everything going for. So is what this landlord's charging reasonable? Even though, yes, it's within our rent standard, great, but is it reasonable for what they're getting? You must perform a housing quality standards inspection and clear the unit. So that checklist and the regs are built into our tenant-based rental assistance program guidelines. You must use adjusted income in this. This is the only one of our 3 activities that deals with adjusted income. Adjusted means adjusted down, taking into account things that they have for medical, elderly, and children, and this sort of thing. And that's for gap calculation purposes. So what's nice for the tenant is if their income is X, then maybe 75% of X is their adjusted income. And that's what you say, we're going to take 30% of that and base their share of rent and utilities on that, theoretical utilities. So that's, just keep in mind, adjusted income is an extra little step. There is a HUD income calculator on there that rolls into TBRA assistance. So that's a great tool to use to determine their adjusted income. Finally, unlike the other programs where you certify income once, in TBRA, you have to recertify income annually if you're serving them for more than 12 months. And under certain circumstances, whenever their income changes, plus or minus a certain amount, so that you can adjust their monthly gap calculation and their TBRA assistance. TBRA may not exceed 24 months. What that means is a single commitment, written commitment to the tenant and to the landlord can't be more for more than 24 months. You could keep renewing them for intervals of no more than 24 months. They could be shorter renewal intervals. And the second bullet point is you must offer them at least 12 months of assistance. But if for some reason they want a 6-month agreement, as little as 6 months, you could do that, but you'd have to have evidence in your file that they actually want that and you're not just shoving it down their throat, for lack of a better term. You must execute a lease addendum and a Violence Against Women Act addendum, both of those for tenant protections in TIBRA. So again, some administrative extra steps that that will make you glad that you're getting bonus general admin to supplement your activity delivery costs, which we'll discuss shortly. So let's talk about focusing back now away from just programs in general and on this NOFA. The maximum application amount is 1.5 million, but again, that amount would only be for exceptional recent spenders of program activities money for home. Most of you, if you're new to home, haven't been with us for a while, or you haven't spent that well lately, it would be 500,000 minimum and maximum. And I meant to remove that from the bottom. So what would it take to get $1.5 million if you spent 60% or more of your 16, 18, and 19 home program activities contracts? I'll stop here and remind you, this has nothing to do with the 50% rule in terms of which contracts we're looking at. So please don't sit there and think it needs to be the same standard of which contracts are in play. It's not. So we generally look at the last 3 contracts a grantee has had, and we are again this year, in which they've had a reasonable chance to do expenditures. So for us, that's 16, 18, and 19, because we haven't yet issued our contracts for the last round of awardees. We're real close, but so that's 60% or more of those three contracts, whatever you might have, 1.5. If you got almost there, $1 million, and if you didn't quite make it, 500,000. And that's without regard to whether that contract's open, not open, etc. Time for Nikki to bring up any questions that got put in the chat that she thinks the group would benefit from us answering.
Okay, so I'm going to read all the questions in the question A.
Okay, and I'm looking. I'm pulling them over so I can read them.
Jay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to start at the top.
Okay.
The first question is, will applications be considered on a rolling basis, or will all applications be considered after the April 9th deadline?
Right, thank you. And the answer is, since this is not what we call an over-the-counter NOFA, then we don't look at applications at all until after April 9th. So it's not first come, first served. Good question.
Next question. What are the project workshops?
Okay. What are the project workshops? Let me say that our projects unit did a workshop last week on rental activities. So that includes rental new construction and rental rehab or ACWIT rehab. And then they did another workshop this week on first-time home buyer, basically subdivisions projects. And that's where you would come in with an extensive application with underwriting elements and all that and a proposed address, totally different than programs where you come to us without addresses, without proposed borrowers. You're just for you, it's a concept. We want to throw the doors open for down payment assistance. We want to advertise it, see who is interested, and try to serve those folks. So that's programs for you. You don't come in with a proposed project whatsoever, just a programmatic idea. So that's when they were, that's kind of what they are. They also had a tribal workshop, which covered both of those subject matters in one longer workshop with the tribal community. So that's what they are. If somebody feels like they missed the boat and wish they had attended a Projects One, I'll reiterate that we can supply you with access to the recording on that and the PowerPoint.
Thank you. The next question is, what if the property is in the county area?
So I don't know exactly what that means. Here's what I'll say. If you're a city, you can operate, and I think we have a future slide that might touch on this, but I'm happy to answer it now. If you're a city, you could give down payment assistance, so first-time home buyer, or owner-occupied rehab assistance, only within the city limits. If you're a county, you could give those types of assistance for only within the unincorporated parts of the county. Tenant-based rental assistance is a little different. If you're a city, you can provide tenant-based rental assistance anywhere within your county as long as you mentioned it on your home application, except for areas that aren't on, I'm just going to say it again, NOFA Appendix A, state home eligible areas. Those are the only areas we can operate, you can operate, because you can't operate where HUD has another grantee already able to operate with home funds. So tenant-based rental assistance, the city can go into their own city and or any other cities within their county, except for what I just said, and into the unincorporated areas. A county can also go into any cities as well as the unincorporated area of the county. You always have to work within your own county for TBRA. So I hope that kind of answers your question about the county area.
Thank you, Jay. Next question. What if the mayor does not hold executing power for contracts? It is a rotating appointment among council members.
Great question, and I believe the only way that would be possible, given our reading of the California Code of Regulations, is that the mayor wouldn't hold executing power if there was a city ordinance that said he or she doesn't. In which case, we just simply want you to upload the ordinance to prove that that's what's the situation there. So it's as simple as that. I don't believe that would be possible without there having been a city ordinance. And in fact, if you read through that, look at that regulation, the city, it's a city, I'll put it that way, could accidentally be in violation of that regulation if they didn't produce an ordinance to let somebody sign contracts on behalf of the city other than the mayor. Nikki, can you add,
Okay,
would you like to add anything to that, or does that sound right?
I think that sounds right. And
Okay.
it is a fairly new concept. It only applies to cities. And so we'll slug through this to getting this right together as we roll this out. You can always use your home inbox to send us an email and ask us specific questions. We'll even be willing to review your draft resolutions prior to application submission. Next question. We are a county. Does the Board of Supervisors still authorize someone in our organization or each city we serve?
Oh, great question. So when you're talking about your county and each city you serve, remember, you could be talking only about tenant-based rental assistance, because otherwise you're not serving within cities for the other two activities. That said, no, what we just said about the mayor doesn't apply to counties. And so, and maybe that wasn't your question about, who can sign things here. The Board of Supervisors can put on the resolution anybody they want and feel comfortable with in terms of signing home documents, both the standard agreement, and it could be the same position or possibly other positions to sign things other than the standard agreement. Okay. So if you're gonna run tenant-based rental assistance, let's say, out into a city within your county, I'm not even sure. You might want to, just as a courtesy, say, hey, city, is it okay if we run TBRA out to in your area? I can't imagine they'd say no, but there's nothing different for the Board of Supervisors to do in that regard, to my knowledge. Nikki, tell me if you disagree.
I think you've answered the question correctly.
Okay.
If a county is offering tenant-based rental assistance, they only need the Board of Supervisors authority to provide that assistance anywhere in the county. They don't need the city's permission to provide rental assistance to a tenant that lives within a city limit.
So that might be a courtesy at most, huh? If they checked in with the city. Okay.
I don't even think they need to check in with the city because it's tenant-based.
Sure.
And we allow the operator, the program operator, to assist the tenant for units located within the city, or vice versa, units located in the county.
Okay.
The next question is coming to us. We have quite a few questions, about 30 so far, so we've got quite a few to answer. The next question is asking you to elaborate on the ordinance language that grants contract execution authority to city management. Would a binding resolution from a city council granting standard agreement authority to a city manager be sufficient?
Not by my reading of the California Code of Regulations, and I feel like we might have failed to in our NOFA in this PowerPoint to put in the authority for this, but I will tell you, it is, as I recall, we've cited it in the sample resolution we give you. And I believe, Nikki, did we put it into the NOFA? Or did we put it into just the standard agreement template?
I believe it's just in the instructions to the standard agreement template.
Okay, so if we'd be happy to share with you the actual code, if you can't Google it quickly, that based on my reading and recollection of the code, it has to be by a city ordinance. So however city ordinances are established there, it comes to the level of city ordinance pretty clearly by the regulatory language. I don't think a simple reso from the city council would do it, because that's kind of how we've always done it. And so we found out not long ago that doesn't seem okay under the California regs. We're happy to work with you.
If you have further questions about this, we can deal with one-on-one questions through our home inbox.
Yeah, remember home NOFA at hcd.ca.gov, not the home inbox that you submit annual and quarterly reports to, please. So everything that relates to this NOFA and questions about it, please make sure it's home NOFA at hcd.ca.gov. And we talk about that a couple of times in this PowerPoint. Okay.
Okay. Next question. How can applicants be confident that the 7.5% bonus for administration will be approved before the deadline or will be considered after the application submittal?
Okay, so let's put it this way. If you apply for tenant-based rental assistance and probably get awarded, because I don't think I see this as a competitive year, I can't promise that. So presuming you get awarded, we're automatically going to grant you an extra 7.5% general admin on that part. So if you apply for 3 activities, you'll get 2.5% off the top for first-time home buyer, but 10% off the top for TBRA. So you'll get your 7.5% bonus admin automatically. You can be utterly confident that if you're awarded funds, you will get the bonus TBRA admin money.
Okay.
And you only have access to those funds once you have an executed contract with us, by the way. There's no such thing as us giving you admin funds somehow up front, pre or post award, or, you know, it's post contract that you can actually access those funds by giving us an admin drawdown request. Go ahead, Nikki.
Okay, next question. Like the cities, do counties need to provide an ordinance showing who is authorized to sign documents? What if we have a letter authorizing a signatory signed by the chief administrative officer for the county?
Good question. So the answer is, yeah, we're talking strictly about cities when it comes to mayors. It's business as usual for the counties. Whomever gets put onto the home authorizing resolution is whose signatures we will accept for the standard agreement and or possibly separate people home drawdown requests later. So no ordinance for counties.
Okay, the next question. Will this meeting speak to the process for early disencumbrances of your home program activities grants if you wouldn't otherwise qualify for this NOFA due to the 50% rule?
Nikki, you want to address that or shall I?
Yeah, I can address that. So typically, disencumbering your grant early would not automatically make you eligible to apply for the NOFA because your grant would be still counted in the 50% rule. We are aware that there are extenuating circumstances that may lead to an exception to this rule, and those will be handled on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Nikki.
Okay, next question. What does SCO stand for? It was in the section about single audit letters.
I apologize if I never spelled that out in writing in the PowerPoint. It stands for the State Controller's Office. And I think I verbalized it, but you're right. I should have put it in writing and on at least the first slide. So my apologies.
Next question. What kind of documentation is required if we are using program income for TBRA?
So this raises a good issue. Let's say that you're a jurisdiction with a lot of program income, and maybe you're at this workshop, maybe intending to apply for a home grant, even though you might have quite a bit of home program income on hand. So what I want to say is, as a reminder, any jurisdiction who doesn't have a current grant with us, who is trying to run a program activity or wants to, needs to engage with their home program rep. We have a rep map on our webpage showing for your county who your rep is of the reps I introduced, plus Tony, if you're in the north part of the state. And you would do what we call general setup conditions with them, which the biggest parts of that have to do with program guidelines. Again, you start with our template, lockdown into track changes. You fill in the blanks, make suggested changes, and we approve them or we don't. And it's a back and forth process until we say these are approved, and we put the approval date on the first page and so forth. Um, um, the other biggest piece of that is we ask about, do you have an admin sub? And if so, did you properly procure them? And also affirmative fair marketing. Do your demographic analysis. Where are their needs? How will you respond to those needs with marketing? Most of you are used to dealing with that yearly on our annual performance report if you have any active program activities. Sounds like we have a dog barking. Okay. And so, um, that's documentation to set up your program. Once you're doing tenant-based rental assistance, what we have is a setup and completion form, and we're currently testing a beta version with a grantee on that, which makes it a lot more transparent in terms of all the relevant factors like your utilities allowance and the unit rent and things like that. So you can anticipate a change to the form that you'll be using. But either way, there's going to be what we call a project setup or setup and completion form and a project drawdown request. And since you asked the question, I will say that my belief is that we might have to start collecting more information up front in general to back up the forms that you're filling out, just as evidence of why you filled out our form the way you did. So that's the kind of documentation that we'd expect if you're using programming from Vertebra. And of course, a quarterly program income report to tell us that you expended X amount of program income on, let's say, TVRA during the last calendar quarter. So I hope that answers your question. If not, again, as always, on all these, feel free to email us at HomeNofa, and we'd be happy to do one-on-ones with you because we can get a lot more done verbally, face-to-face, virtually, than in this venue.
Thank you, Jay. I do want to add that the program income, use of program income is going to change as far as the general setup conditions. We have to actually have a written agreement with the communities that are utilizing their program income. And we will be rolling out a process probably right after the NOFA portal is open and sending out notification of what that new process will be. But it will involve submitting information through a program income portal for program activities.
Yeah, and I think that would not be a huge deal, Nikki, to basically make this year's NOFA application into, for the most part, a PI only application like they have on the project side already.
So watch for that to come. It'll
Yep.
come shortly. Okay, next question. Where can we obtain a copy of the slides being reviewed?
Basically, the PowerPoint. We're going to post the PowerPoint on our website. We first have to get it ADA remediated internally. It's a kind of a big presentation here, so there's a little bit of a degree of difficulty, but as quickly as we can on the heels of these, this is the fourth of five NOFA webinars. The fifth one's for tribes this afternoon for programs. We'll get those remediated and posted on our website. So the PowerPoints and if possible, these Zoom recordings.
Okay, next question. What is a home consortium? What are examples of home consortiums?
Nikki, I think you have a little more expertise than I do in this. I'd love for you to answer this if you have a comfort level with that.
I do. So typically a home consortium are jurisdictions that get a small allocation from HUD every year. So they're little entitlement jurisdictions. And they typically will band together in a group to increase the amount of money that they have to undertake home projects. And then they work together to identify projects in their area. Every once in a while, a state eligible jurisdiction that is in close proximity to a consortium may join the consortium just to take advantage of the funding that the consortium has if it's going to benefit their community. It doesn't happen very, very often, but when it does, when these consortiums can, take their allocations and band them together, they are not eligible. All the participants in a consortium are not eligible to apply through the state home program. They will get their funding directly from HUD based on their numbers. Okay, the next question. Can you repeat the subsidy limit?
I actually cannot because that's in my speaker's notes on another slide, but this is a good opportunity to tell you that if you go to our home webpage and if anybody needs that, that can be put into the I think the Q&A under answers, or one way or the other, we can get that to you if you don't know where it is. It just starts with hcd.ca.gov, and then you go to Programs Active, and you'll find Home on there. So you go to our Home, what I call splash page, and you'll see a Resources tab. And under the Resources tab, you'll see something that says Home Limits. And there you'll see a link to our HCD Limits page. And there you can find all three sets of limits that I talked about. Make sure you're looking under the federal limits for home and CDBG and National Housing Trust Fund. Make sure you don't go to the state limits part of that page, because that means for state funded programs like CalHome. It doesn't mean HCD federal programs. So be really careful when you're on that page. And we try to give you that advice on right where we give you the link. The other way to get to the limits page is just go to, instead of active programs active, just go to the limits page. I think it's shown as income limits. There's a link there and it gets you to the same exact page. It's just a different path that doesn't go through the home splash page to get there. So that's where you'll find all the limits in question, including HUD's latest subsidy limits, which again, we reformat and try to make all these limits into a much more user friendly format than HUD's ever produced.
Okay, the next question, and I might just field this one because it's more of
Sure.
a project question, Jay.
Yeah.
Can CHODOs apply for first-time homebuyer acquisition funding and set it aside for a project where there is no home project funding? And the answer to that is, although our federal and state regulations have a carve out for some CHODO funding to help with development dollars, a CHODO cannot use any home funding to acquire a project site and set it aside. And if you want more information on that, we can get that for you by you submitting a specific request and explaining to us what you want to do and how you want to do it through the Home NOFA inbox.
I'll add to that. Generally speaking, the whole idea with CHODO infill new construction is that a CHODO would own or buy land, build on it, maybe after identifying a first-time home buyer who wants to commit to that home in a conditional commitment in writing, like, well, yeah, if you get that property and build on it, we'll buy that from you, the owner builder, with that we would actually assist that borrower with the down payment assistance. That's what makes it an eligible infill new construction project for a CHODO.
Thank you, Jay. Next question is a repeat about the copy of the presentation being available.
Okay. Asked and answered.
I think we've answered that question.
Yes, it will. Stay tuned.
The next question, for tenant-based rental assistance, can jurisdictions pay 100% of the rent if tenant households have zero income?
Almost. I believe that we've established a very generous minimum. Off the top of my head, correct me if I'm wrong, Nikki, but I think where we landed is you got to charge the tenant at least like $1 a month or something. Like, you think, why bother? But and actually that $1 they'd pay would go towards their theoretical meaning they're non-included utilities, and you have this utility allowance schedule that says, well, if this and that's not included in terms of utilities that come with a rented unit, that's theoretically going to cost them $150 a month. So what happens is their dollar, if they have zero income, goes towards their theoretical utilities, and you, the program, would not only pay their whole unit rent, but you would also give what's called the utilities reimbursement for the other $149 of their theoretical utilities on top of the dollar they paid. So that's a little mind-blowing, right? But yeah, it can't be zero, but it can be a very, very small number. You might want to make it, hey, you guys pay at least 10 a month, 100 a month. You got to have a minimum. It can't just be, 30% or down to 10%. If their income's zero, there has to be a provision for that. And we've built that into our not yet released, but about to be released, updated tenant-based rental assistance guidelines to make that very clear to you. There must be a dollar minimum and not just only a percentage minimum to account for zero income households.
Okay, next question. Can you please restate the new wrinkle that you mentioned for the TBRA program?
Sure. The wrinkle is a good wrinkle, and it's that you can collect, and this was in the last NOFA too, bonus general admin. That's the wrinkle. It's good news. We're bringing back that popular feature where you can get, let me back up a step. This kind of gets to a slide we're going to get to, but project-related soft costs for tenant-based rental assistance, HUD finally changed that in I think it was 13, Nikki, to allow for a little bit of project-related soft cost for each tenant. Only, we set it at 5% maximum, but HUD says that can only be for income determination and unit inspection. So that doesn't really help pay for all the other stuff you do beyond those two things, like rent reasonableness, et cetera, cutting monthly checks, this sort of thing. So our solution to that is to supplement the standard 2.5% general admin that we've always taken off the top of your whole award. And for that part of the award, which is for tenant-based rental assistance, we're actually going to increase that to 10% general admin. And the intention there is to give you enough administrative money to probably be able to pay for either your own staff cost or for your outsource costs, because a lot of you will turn to your local public housing authority, perhaps, I know a few of you who do, to run your program, your TPA program for you as a subrecipient. So it's just trying to give you enough money so that it's not a loss leader and that you don't have to, take out of the general fund to pay for your staffers who were working maybe primarily on home TPA.
Okay, the next question is a very, very specific for the County of Tulare. I have cut and pasted this question into a request for response through the Home NOFA inbox. So Sandra Sabin, we will be responding to you directly regarding your question because it's a specific question and not a general question.
And just so everybody knows, we're about to hit a 10-minute break as soon as we plow through these questions. So thank you for having been here about an hour and a half. We want to let you take care of your bio needs and stuff, but let's plow through these as quickly as we can and get you to the break.
Okay, next question. What is the process if the city decides to disencumber its 2018 grants and reapply under the current NOFA? With first-time homebuyer being on hold, we have not been able to spend. So the process will be, if you want to do that, you need to submit a request through the Home NOFA inbox or to your home rep, and we will take that request under consideration. When do you typically receive a response from HUD on requests for home ownership value limit adjustments?
This is not the answer you want to hear. Our HUD rep has a lot of work and it has to run through a HUD rep. And there are times where they have it for weeks or a couple months or so before we get at least an initial response. So it varies. It depends on where they are in their work cycle, just like a lot of us. There's times I can't be nearly as responsive as I want to be to our constituents, you folks, because I'm just sometimes just buried in work. It happens, right? So it just depends kind of when we submit it versus when they might be in the middle of reviewing everybody's annual action plan or 5-year consolidated plan. You know, they have a lot of roles there at our HUD office, and sometimes we have to get in line. So that's, can't give a firm answer on that, but that is a reason why after we take our time to get through yours, um, sometimes we're waiting for a while for their answers. And the good news is we do ping them from time to time and say, hey, do you have an ETA? You know, when do you think? Yeah, that's the most we can do.
Okay, next question. Regarding 50% expenditure rate, are you including the 21 grants, even if standard agreements have not been received yet?
It's a great question. The answer is, given that we haven't produced the standard agreements yet, and then they have to route internally at HCD, and it goes through there can be a little bottleneck issue there. I can't see those being in the grantee's hands to sign, let alone, you know, by the NOFA application due date, which is all that matters, which is April 9th. So I assume they won't come into play. And if I were a grantee and I received one to sign on April 5th, I would probably wait until after April 9th to sign it. And even then, there's some turn time on our end to countersign it before it's in effect. So I don't really see it as a realistic possibility that any of those contracts could be in effect. And therefore, if they're not, they won't count against the 50% rule. So that's good news.
Okay, another question. Can Choto applicants use home funds to do acquisition rehab? Was that just excluded from down payment assistance or the home program altogether?
So Choto's cannot do it's excluded from home altogether. You're right. Otherwise, ACT and rehab would have been and used to be a Choto eligible activity. But since it's no longer home eligible, that comes off of our menu for everybody in this meeting. Great question.
Okay, the next question.
We're almost
Can
there, folks.
21, yeah, we're getting to the end. Can 21 first-time homebuyer funding recipients also apply under this NOFA?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the question we received before. Presuming that they don't have a fully executed contract with us by the NOFA application due date of April 9th, yes, as long as they don't have other home contracts, let's say a current 18 and or 19, extended 18 and or 19 contract that would be counted in the 50% rule. So assuming you mean there's no contracts in play for 18 or 19 at that as of April 9th, then yes, you could apply and essentially have received an award for 2 consecutive NOFA years, even though you haven't spent on the last one.
Next question, can a jurisdiction apply for 2 programs, such as OOR and first-time homebuyer?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, that's extremely common. I would say that I see more combinations of first-time homebuyer and OOR apps than just first-time homebuyer only, or OOR only. So yes, you can. I'm glad you asked this question because I think we didn't manage to put into this slideshow the fact that this year in eCivis, we've structured it differently. So if any of you came to us 2 years ago, you saw that you had to fill out a whole new complete application for every single home program activity you wanted to apply for. This year, you're going to do what's called a main application to just say, who are you? You know, what's your not DUNS number, whatever that thing's called that replaced it, and it's reflected on our forms now. And you upload your tax ID number form and such. So you're going to do all the kind of generalized stuff once, and we call that the main application. And there's basically two forms to fill out for that, part one and part two. And then you're going to do what we call subordinate applications for each, a separate subordinate application for each program activity underneath that one. So some call it the parent-child structure. And the whole point of that is because of the way eCivis works, this is what allows us to put your home award, whether it's one, two, or all three activities, into one single standard agreement. And thus, if you later want to move money between activities, we don't have to all do an amendment together, which is a good dance to avoid. So please keep on the lookout when you go into eCivis there's going to be instructions embedded into it that say, do this parent on the main one once and do this sub for each program activity you want to do as part of that application. And it ties them together. Long answer to a short question.
Okay, and I'm not sure I understand this question, but I'm going to read it. Maybe it will make more sense to you, Jay.
Yeah.
Is the last expenditure rate, in quotes, table that you showed related to the best recent spenders qualification?
That's exactly right. That's what that's all about. So it just says 60% plus 1.5 million and such. So that's what we call the best recent spenders, or those that achieved a 60+% or a 55+% expenditure rate on those three particular home program activities contracts. You've got it right.
Okay, and then the next question, is an extension available for the 19 home grants that have been suspended? Do you want me to take that one, Jay?
Yes, please, Nikki.
Okay, we will always entertain a request to extend a contract. You just have to submit your request through your home representative. The next question is directly for the city of Los Angeles, and I'm not sure I understand the question because we do not deal with organizations that serve the homeless communities. So I'm going to cut and paste this question into our home inbox and see if we can give you some resources that can answer your question.
Yeah, it doesn't feel relevant to our subject matter today.
I'm just going to copy this and send it to the home inbox, and you should get a response through there. We have a request. May I please have a copy of this recording? This recording will be available on our HCD website as soon as it's remediated, as well as the slide deck. If we can't get that up, then we will be able to send them out ad hoc, but not until.
Yeah, just ask the Home NOFA inbox. So if we can't post it on the website, we'll just email you the requester a copy, basically a link and a password.
The next question is, can a housing authority apply for TBRA?
No, housing authorities are not units of local government by the definitions that HUD gives us. So therefore, only cities and counties can apply for TBRA, and they can certainly use the services of a housing authority and often do.
Next question, continue question, what do you need to do to provide housing vouchers?
That's a big question. It's basically, how does it look to, I think, run a TBRA program? So I think that's beyond the scope of this training. Please, I would say, email that question to the Home NOFA inbox, unless, Nikki, do we have a way to know the contact information? I think we might, because of the registration roster and such. So we can circle back with you on that and just kind of have a discussion to get your, more specifics on your question, if that's okay.
Back here, I was moving that other question.
Okay.
So tenant-based rental assistance is not a housing voucher, operates like a housing voucher. So if you want to provide rental assistance in your community, you would need to apply for a tenant-based rental assistance program. But it's temporary. It's not like a permanent Section 8 voucher. I hope that
Right.
also adds some clarity.
Right. So we have the voucher model and it looks like Section 8 vouchers, but yeah, it's a temporary voucher and it's a home voucher, which does essentially the same thing as a Section 8 voucher. Difference is it's not permanent. As long as they're low income, so yeah, let's keep going.
And the next question in regards to the mayor's signature, does that apply only to the application and contract or to the following reports?
So
To
good
follow-up
question.
reports?
We have an application certification form, and I don't see that. That's not a contract, so I could see that any authorized representative in the authorizing resolution, you're going to see a section 4 for who can sign in so many words anything but the standard agreement. So you'll put like maybe city manager, community development director, what have you there, and they can sign essentially anything but the actual home standard agreement. So to answer your question, mayor signature, does that apply only to the application and contract? It applies only to the contract, actually, not to the application certification. And so in section 4, you'll probably designate someone who, or a couple positions that can sign everything but the home standard agreement when it comes. And then we've got to repeat the repeat of that one.
Now we've got another question about this notice, and I'm now thinking that these are notices that are coming from HUD specifically, and the agency you would contact. And this second one is Office of Policy Development and Research. Further down in the notice, I think they're seeking approval of some kind of new regulation, and they are opening up a comment period. And so you would have to follow the information that comes with this notice.
Yeah, basically we have nothing to do with that.
If our program has been on hold, does our extensive wait list count toward encumbering all remaining frozen funds?
Okay, and so no. Remember that the 50% rule is talking about expended funds, not intended funds or even committed funds. So what that would need to look like for a first-time home buyer, for example, is escrow is closed, you've assisted the borrower, and you've given us your legitimate drawdown request and project setup and completion report. So that's the only way that you could have a first-time homebuyer activity count towards an expenditure against your previous award.
Another question about having an extended 18 grant, but have not been able to spend due to the hold on the program.
Right, so that's more of a comment than a question, but you're in pretty good company there. If you want to turn that into a request about doing something with your 18 home grant, people have touched on the idea of early disencumbrance or extensions, then we can have that conversation. Just email it to the Home NOFA inbox and we will have that conversation fairly soon.
And I just want to put a plug in here because it seems like we're getting several questions about the hold on the first-time homebuyer program. Tomorrow is a mandatory first-time homebuyer policy webinar. The registration link, if you haven't registered for that webinar, is posted on our website. You would go into our NOFA. When you hit our splash page, you would click on the NOFA icon, and there is a list of all the webinars we are currently holding. Scroll to the bottom and register for that first-time homebuyer mandatory webinar. You will not be able to resume your programs until after you have attended this webinar and brought your program into compliance with the new HUD regulations. Well, not new HUD regulations, but the new regulations that the state of California had to deploy in order to be in compliance with the HUD regulations. The next question is the $500,000 request per activity, or is it $500,000 per jurisdiction?
It's per jurisdiction. So basically per main application, and then you can divvy up the money in your sub applications. But yes, that's the maximum for the jurisdiction for program activities for this NOFA.
And the last question, thank you, Mike Hodges, for putting a little bit of laughter into this group. Who does Jay think will win the Super Bowl? I think it's pretty evident based on his backsplash. And I'm going to switch over to the chat because I think somebody may have entered a question in there. Oh, no.
Okay.
We put a link in the chat to the home income limit.
That's fair. And in the meantime, I will tell you that even as an avid, obviously, fan, I don't ever always assume my team is, most likely to win. I just strongly hope they do, but they're going to have their hands awfully full. So I don't know if I would bet money on them right now. We'll see on Sunday.
So I think we've been in this group for a long time. Would like to do a 10-minute break. And so it is 10:46. Can we be back at 10:56? And we're just going to pause the recording.
Very low on a grant amount for LOR. Nobody's ever taken advantage of this, but in our home standard agreements, we have had an allowance for actual evidence of the actual project-related soft costs. The other thing to keep in mind is for owner-occupied rehab, per the HUD regs, they don't allow you to charge to the borrower or grant to the borrower even non-customary costs. That includes a lot of things that wouldn't be associated normally with somebody's own rehab they did without the home program. So escrow, title aren't normal parts of someone's own home rehab. So if you're going to use title and escrow and have those fees, for example, you couldn't charge them to the borrower.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I forgot to start the recording. So can we go back through the
Sure.
slides you went through?
Okay.
I am so sorry, folks.
It's okay.
Okay. Thank goodness there's only 2 slides.
Okay. Well, and we are not that many days removed from Groundhog Day, right? So a lot of you are going to get deja vu all over again here, as Yogi Berra said. But now that we've got the recording going, I've got to repeat my commentary on a couple slides. So now we're going to talk about program requirements, use of funds, forms of assistance, and like I said, underwriting and property standards are the last 2, which are a little bit dry, but it's things that need to be heard and said. So eligible uses of funds for first-time home buyer are project-related soft cost, or what we've called ADC. I think that's borrowed from CDBG. We will pay up to 6.5% of the home assistance amount for down payment assistance. You can tack on up to 6.5%, but again, like I said, before we were recording this, you do have to ultimately be prepared to, and maybe even immediately, if we change the way we do things a little, back that up, support that with either admin sub, flat fee billings, or subrecipient time and expense billings to you, or your own time and expense billings to demonstrate how you got to the project-related soft cost figure you did. What I didn't say before, and I'll say now that we're recording, is that this would be the full load cost of the staffers involved. So not just their hourly pay, but hourly plus benefits pay. So I think they call that the full load cost or something like that. That's what's chargeable in terms of the time this individual spent on this, let's say doing income determination for this household, that because we're talking about project-related soft costs, we're talking about projects that actually made it to the finish line and ended up in IDIS by us after you submitted what we needed from you. If you work on something, and we know this happens a lot, and you do their income determination and that project doesn't work out, they never found their home, they didn't want to go through with it, whether it's a rehab or first-time home buyer or tenant, you cannot charge those as project-related soft costs because the project didn't complete. And so those would be properly billed under home general admin. So keep that in mind as well. The second bullet point is soft costs can be up to 6.5% of the total development cost for infill new construction. So that's like purchasing the property and building it before you sell it to an eligible home buyer, which all of that does have to happen for infill new construction. You can't just do part of that. It's got to be all three stages. And then just a reminder here, the first mortgage must be a 30-year or 33-year fixed in some cases, loan, fully amortized, no balloons, no interest only, nothing funky. And they are required to have a first mortgage, and home can be in second or a lower position, but never the primary or only mortgage. And again, I'll repeat, they must have impounds for property taxes and insurance, not just principal and interest, so that they can't get in trouble with those things that you will handle, by the way, in your annual project monitoring for that project to make sure they remain in compliance. I think we'll get into this later, but during the home affordability period, usually 15 years, got to be owner occupied primary residence or else. So that causes you to have to monitor that project for at least 15 years in most cases. So that would be one less thing to worry about property taxes and insurance if they have impounds, because I think it's impossible to blow it if they're built into your mortgage payment and you're making your mortgage payments on the first. Owner occupied rehab. So we'll revisit this. So this allows for first time home buyer was up to 6.5%, and this is up to 24%. Notice it doesn't say just 24%. It says up to 24%. So you have to ultimately support that through, I'll say it again, now that we're recording, admin sub billings, admin sub, that's kind of jargon, administrative subcontractor billings if you procured one and they're helping you run your program or running your program. Otherwise, time and expense reports from your subrecipient or your own staff time at full load cost, tying with documentation, who did what when for that project that made it to the finish line. And again, if it doesn't make it to the finish line, now you're talking about getting your what would have been project related soft costs, getting it from general admin. Tenant-based rental assistance is up to 5% thanks to HUD's move in 2013 to actually finally allow for something for project-related soft costs. And this is HUD says this can only be for the time and expense, mostly time, you spend on doing the income certification, which we know is a lengthy process, and unit inspections, and that's per unit. So that's a little shift. Previously, we've been a little lax about, hey, if your total, for example, you give us a project setup and completion report, it's 3 months worth of assistance for tenants, it adds up to, I'm going to pick a random number, $10,000, then we'd say, okay, well, as long as you're not claiming activity delivery over 5% of $10,000, that's fine, because on the whole, it doesn't exceed our maximum. We've been reminded that no, that's actually per unit. So if you have units that get done for less than 5% somehow cost on those, I feel like it's unlikely, but I guess if the rent's low enough and this sort of thing, it could happen, then you can't take what you didn't use there and apply it to the next household that took more than 5% of what you paid them for getting them ready and certified. So do keep that in mind. It's on a household by household basis. I wish it weren't that way, but it's that way. I went the wrong way, pardon me. Ineligible use of home funds. Refinancing existing debt, can't do that. You can't pay for expenses incurred after the final expenditure deadline in your home program contract. There's always an expenditure deadline. Then you have 2 months later, your paperwork, what we call drawdown deadline. By the way, before I forget, in the next contracts we're about to issue for the last NOFA and this NOFA, the contracts will have a 3-year expenditure life from the time that we anticipate you get your standard agreement to sign. In the old days, it was 3 years from the date of the award letter. Problem is, sometimes we took too long or a number of months to get from award to contract, and we were chewing up part of your 3 years. So we're going to knock that off. We're going to give you 3 good years expenditure period from the time you could actually run your program or start your program and do expenditures, including for admin funds. So that's good news. You can't pay delinquent property taxes with home funds, nor can you reinstate insurance and add home funds to the deal. So you'd have to find another way to deal with ones that run into problems like that. Because on owner-occupied rehab, for example, they're not forced to have impounds, and they might run into those problems. Finally, you can't pay for expenses incurred prior to the execution of your standard agreement you would get out of this NOFA award, except for environmental prep. And there's not that much to do now that we don't recommend you do 5-year tiered reviews and such. You just do NEPA, environmental per project, and that there's nothing for you to do in a program until you have your contract and you can start up your projects. But if you want to incur expenses to work on general setup conditions between award and contract, as always, just email us at the Home NOFA inbox or to me, or through your rep, better yet, say what kind of things you would want to do pre-contract, for which you'll want to be reimbursed with home admin funds later, and we will give you written approval. Forms of assistance. Okay, home loans, 0 to 3% simple interest is per the state home regs. So until and unless we roll to state guidelines, which is on the horizon, not the immediate horizon, but there's a possibility that could be changed. I don't know if there's a probability, but for now, we are definitely all stuck with, to put it negatively, 0 to 3% simple interest. You can do variations of that for seniors, extra low income, if forgivable interest, things like that. You can't say you're going to be able to forgive principal. You can't. So that's the terms of the home loan, and it has to be fully deferred, not amortized. No payments for the life of the loan, although they can always voluntarily make payments, and you would credit those towards principal, not interest, if they do. You could have a minimum, don't send us payments less than $100 or something, because administratively, that's probably not feasible. So that's a conversation we can have. Home grants. So we just talked about home loans, I think a little bit, for things that you grant money rather to the borrower or tenant rather than loan, are for tenant-based rental assistance. It's all given to them. So we call that a home grant. Don't confuse that with when we give you a home grant, a NOFA award. Yes, that's kind of like a home grant too, from us to you. Really what it is a line of credit. We call it a grant. You're doing grant writing to get this line of credit from us, right? And ultimately be able to get reimbursed for your outlays, et cetera. In this sense, home grant means giving money to the homeowner, home buyer, or tenant, as opposed to loaning them the money, okay? So tenant-based rental assistance, you always give it, even the security deposit. Relocation payments, you always give it, you never loan it. It's pretty obvious. Lead-based paint, hazard evaluation and reduction cannot be charged as a loan on owner-occupied rehab. It's grants. So for owner-occupied rehab, there's a special form of grant involved here, and it has to do with a lack of equity. So scenario number one, somebody has a mortgage that is, let's say 80% of the present home value, and once you do the rehab, it would be only like maybe 70% of their home value. That means you have 30% of their home value that you must loan them against if your job's that large. Beyond that, once you've taken them to 100% encumbered or combined loan to value, right? So if their home's going to be worth 250, and now between their existing first mortgage and your home assistance, you've got them up to 250,000 of loans, you need to grant the rest of the money to them. So that's what we call a rehab grant. And I kind of say for lack of equity. There's one stipulation about that, which is your maximum rehab grant for lack of equity cannot exceed, remember that home person unit subsidy limit, 25% of that figure. So we talked about round figures, $300,000 for that 3 or 4 bedroom subsidy limit. So if you took 25% of that, that would be like $75,000 maximum rehab grant on top of the money you'd loan them. Okay, so you have to comply with not only that, but also the actual subsidy limit is always going to come into play for that rehab project as well. So you have two conditions that must satisfy. And the good news is we released a management memo to walk you through how this works and how this looks, because you have to submit to us for pre-approval before you go this direction, same as a reconstruction. And oftentimes these things kind of go hand in hand. and we get submittals from you to do both of these things, we'll look at everything and say yeah or no. And it comes with a worksheet that crunches the numbers for you. It looks at their available equity, their after rehab value, any other assistance loans you might be putting in, let's say CalHome or CDBG or something else, other loans that are about to go on the property, and our loan, and it says, okay, well then this much needs to be loan and this much needs to be grant. And then the worksheet looks at that and says, but that grant's over 25% of the subsidy limit you just typed in, so you can't do it. Maybe at that point you are able to cut down some couple things off the wish list for general property improvements and get it back in bounds to 25% of the subsidy limit. So I say that mostly for the benefit of the experienced practitioners here who have some idea what I'm talking about. So I just thought it was worth kind of going through that little exercise. Oh, that was scenario one. Scenario two is you have someone who maybe they've got a home in a market where it's worth 200,000 and they have a $225,000 mortgage on it. And after rehab, it's not going to be worth even 225. So they're going to end up over 100% loan to value based on their one loan or two loans. At that point, you would grant them all of the home rehab assistance because you're not going to add to their problem. You're never going to take someone over 100 or further over 100 if they're already going to be over 100, even based on the after rehab value. Again, that rehab grant is still limited to 25% of the applicable subsidy limit considering the number of bedrooms. And as it says, naturally, you need our advance written approval for this, just like with reconstructions. So I anticipate there could be a couple questions in the Q&As later for us to talk through. Let's keep going. Infill new construction. So we're going to whiz through this because people don't really go for this much, and it's the devil's in the details here. And there's a lot of information in our NOVA application about the details on the forms. So you just need to kind of look at them and read through them and engage with us if there's likely questions there. So it's just going to whiz through these just so they got said. Reasonableness of profit or return to developer, project cost reasonableness, market analysis, experience and financial capacity of the developer, especially at Chodo, firm financial commitments in place to fully fund the project. So you can't do something that's going to end up being upside down and a big headache for you. And it would be your headache, not ours, because we can only assist at the point of project completion. Infill new construction also, for property standards, has to satisfy all state and local current codes, ordinances, and zoning. That's not surprising. For rehab property standards, you've got to establish rehab standards. And that kind of looks like, hey, whenever we're going to replace a roof on a pitched slope, we're going to do it with dimensional comp shingles of 25, 30 years, what have you. You might even kind of call out a couple of brands. So you should have sort of pre-defined materials that you're going to use, maybe similar with vinyl or the new kind of fiberglass variation windows that have to do with weatherization or replacing bad windows, dual pane, low E squared, whatever. You want to call that out separately so that it's not decision time when you're doing your work write-up and inspection report. Hey, if that window needs to be replaced, we've got a go-to list that says this is what we do. And this ensures kind of uniformity and fairness instead of, people being perceived to get special treatment or differential treatment. Let's touch on major systems. So major systems, I've got a cheat sheet here because I didn't memorize these yet. So this is what the Home Final Rule in 2013 added as a rehab requirement. They said major systems are structural support, roofing, windows, doors, siding, gutters, plumbing, electrical, and HVAC. So you don't have to memorize that list, but it's in the owner-occupied program guidelines for one. It's also in the Home Final Rule at 24 CFR Part 92, by the way, if you want to kind of dive into that and take a look at that, because as it says, each of those things I just mentioned has to have a remaining useful life of at least 5 years. If you guys inspect and figure that roof doesn't have 5 years left in it, or the air conditioner, roofs can sometimes be recoated. Air conditionings can often be repaired and be able to say, yes, now it's got at least 5 years. We can deal with the ductwork. So it's not always just wholesale change it out. if it doesn't have 5 years left. Sometimes it's a repair, not a replacement. For acquisition only, so down payment assistance, it just has to satisfy health and safety and local code compliance. So you never hold existing homes to new home standards, and they don't have to have R, 47 insulation in the attic necessarily, whatever you want to call it. But whatever is called for by the code in terms of, it might say if you're going to do a rehab, you have to upgrade the insulation to this level. If it doesn't say that, then you don't. That's not really local code compliance. That might just be improving weatherization. If there's a health and safety issue, there can't be any more of those at the project completion. Again, these would be at the expense of the home seller to your home buyer, never at the home buyer's expense. TBRA, it's a little different. It must meet housing quality standards. In fact, all of these must meet housing quality standards. That's often not talked about and it's overlooked. But if you look at that list, it's kind of a make sense list. And you kind of course, expect any home you rehab or buy to meet all those criteria. And in tenant-based rental assistance, that's a standard, and we've integrated those standards into the TBRA program guidelines. For manufactured housing, it gets a little different for reconstructions of those. So again, remove an old one because it's cheaper to buy a new one over at the manufacturer and plop it down on the same pad. That requires a permanent foundation and utility hookups. For rehab of a manu, it requires foundation and anchoring to meet state and local codes. Sorry to be reading the slides, but I don't know a way to paraphrase these. And this is the interesting part. The lease period must be at least equal to the affordability period for purchases. So if you're talking about automatically a 5, 10, or 15-year affordability period, depending on the home assistance amount for purchases of a manufactured home, I don't know how you're going to get a space rent lease period that's at least that long. Maybe that's why I don't think we're really ever seeing first-time homebuyer projects come in that were for manufactured homes. Let's talk about environmental review and NEPA. So this is one of the federal overlays. NEPA, as it says there, is the National Environmental Policy Act at 24 CFR and Part 58. So the act itself, sorry, is not there, but the HUD regulations in compliance with that act for all of us to use is at Part 58. If HUD themselves are taking on a project, they would be under Part 50, but we don't really care about that. We're all subject to the HUD regulations of Part 58, which is their way of getting us to comply with the statutes in that act. And it basically says that, well, the long and short of NEPA and federal environmental is that no funds may be committed, keyword committed, to a home activity or project before the completion of the environmental review for that project. So this is not a programmatic idea, except for general admin. So at the beginning of a grant, you're going to give us a certain form that says for general admin, this is exempt. And then you've satisfied that requirement that you technically evaluated environmental and said, we're just milling around in the office. There's no environmental impact, of the environment on us that's new or changing, or us on the environment, because NEPA is all about both of those things, which got drilled into my head during 3 different HUD NEPA webinars, which is, this isn't just about your project's impact on the environment, but it's also about the environment's impact upon the occupants of your project, okay? Or workers in different kind of projects. So keep that in mind, that's what NEPA is really trying to get to, is make sure nobody's or nothing's harmed by the project. So the rest of the point is, so for admin, it's one and done at the beginning of your grant, and you just leave that in your documentation. But for every tenant-based rental assistance, first-time homebuyer OOR, you fill out one of 2 different forms, and you do what it says to do on the form, and you address each of the areas the form says, and you sign it. Then you may commit funds to that tenant or the homeowner or the home buyer. The required forms for general admin, first-time homebuyer, and OOR and TBRA are on HUD's environmental page, and there's the website. If you want to take a snip of that, feel free while it's up on the screen. You'll end up with a copy of this PowerPoint from our website, but if you just Google HUD environmental, this will be the first hit and you'll go right into it. So there's where the forms are found, and they have a great page for related laws and authorities for owner-occupied rehab, which walks you through worksheets for each and every factor on the form. So let's talk about the forms. The first one for general admin, first-time homebuyer in TBRA, they use a form. They give you a form to use called CENST. Stands for categorically excluded, not subject to the laws and authorities. Short and sweet, pretty easy, pretty straightforward to do the process. And I think you'd be usually hard pressed to find a project that kind of fails on this level. So you do one per project. For owner-occupied rehab, now we're rising to a higher level of environmental review called categorically excluded, subject to those additional statutes. And so now what used to be found on what was called the statutory worksheet, when that was the form that HUD used, they have gotten rid of that, and they have the CEST form, which is just the initials for the level of environmental review that's triggered whenever you're rehabilitating a property. And so now you've got sort of, and a lot of you know this and have to walk through this a lot with us, you have to do a much more extensive environmental review. So HUD's got really good technical assistance on their environmental website to help you be able to do a good job filling out this form. And this is really important. This has been true for a number of NOFA cycles now, based on bad results that we used to see when we'd go out and do a closeout monitoring and look at your OOR project and look at the NEPA and go, there is no NEPA. They didn't do one. Holy cow. They skipped that step. Okay. Or some were done, but done poorly. So we thought, okay, it's time for us to front load that. So we changed the requirement and said, you need to have us approve your CEST basically form and the package, the supporting documents on each owner-occupied rehab project prior to you committing funds, meaning in writing, to the homeowner. And so that's our way of trying to keep you and us out of trouble with HUD for what's called the choice limiting action, which is committing funds to a project that's not been certified by your NEPA certifying officer to be no impact. While I'm on the subject, your NEPA certifying officer as a default is your mayor, CAO, CEO. So it has to be kind of at the top of your food chain in your governmental structure, unless and until specifically delegated down to a subordinate position in writing specific to environmental. And we send out to you with our general setup conditions package, the format you need to use for a NEPA delegation. So keep that in mind. It's important who signs these NEPA certifications to say the project's okay. We do suggest that you submit those OOR CEST packages to your rep for their pre-approval before you ever have your NEPA certifying officer sign them, or else it's very likely that we're going to have you make some changes and you'll have to go back to them and say, sorry, here's a new and improved one. Would you please sign this? So do yourself a favor, please, and have us pre-approve them before it's signed, then resubmit it. And we'll just, of course, quickly approve it because all we needed at that point was the signature. Time for questions. Nick.
Okay. We only have 3 questions in our inbox this time. We should be able to get through these fairly quickly. The first-time homebuyer education housing counseling requirements are not available with 136 miles of our location. The online classes we used in the past are no longer acceptable to home. This requirement alone makes first-time homebuyer impossible.
And I think I've got to say I respectfully disagree, because you have the ability to farm that work out to service providers that don't have to be anywhere near you, and they can provide remote counseling. They might have modules and such. The only requirements are that it's somebody on HUD's list that's a HUD certified housing counselor, and so the organization has to be and your counselor has to be. And so the first time home buyer would march through their program, and then there would need to be some one-on-one aspect with that housing counselor provider. So that's the good news, is it can be done by distance, maybe not the kind of canned tools that used to be used, I think, and that didn't probably involve any kind of personalized aspect. So yeah, that's the difference, is you have to be selective about whom you use, has to be on HUD's list in so many words. And the housing counselors know it has to entail some one-on-one customized to that particular household. Go ahead, Nikki.
Okay, the next question. Maybe a dumb question. The 3.5% admin cost is for an overall program. And then the OOC, which I think they meant the project-related soft cost, is cost directly for each project within the program. So they're wanting some confirmation there.
Great question. So let me give you, first of all, it's 2.5% off the top for admin, not 3.5%. But that said, so when you're talking about, okay, where do the pots of money go? So let me give you an illustration, and I'm going to use a million just because the math is easier. So you apply for $1 million of owner-occupied rehab, and you get awarded 25,000. So 2.5% comes off the top and gets put in your general admin bucket, so to speak, okay, for your contract. And the other, the remainder is 975,000. From that 975,000, you're paying for two different kinds of things. You're paying for actual direct assistance to the homeowner. We're talking about owner-occupied rehab, so homeowner. And you're paying your project-related soft costs. Up to 24% of that assistance amount can be paid to you out of that same 975,000. In other words, the 97,500 that remained in the activity OOR, that's for both activity cost and activity delivery costs. So I hope that answers your question. Not a dumb question.
Sorry about that, Jay. My
Sure.
little barker wanted out of the room.
Sure.
Okay, so the next question is, when you say refinancing existing debt is disallowed, how do we handle an heir taking over their deceased person's loan? If they've met the eligibility and take responsibility for the loan, is this considered refinancing?
Yeah, I would say no, that's not a transfer. If they assume the loan, so to speak, as an heir, as an income eligible heir, that's not a refinance, because after all, they're not we're not putting more home funds in the deal, nor are we taking out home funds or measuring their gap. We would just, in that scenario, be letting them assume the loan. So that's not refinancing. That's not what we're talking about.
And the next question is, if an applicant has acceptable spending on previous grants, can they apply for the 1.5 million for TBRA?
Well, so two different things. The 1.5 million, is just for any and all of the three activities if you qualify. Acceptable spending on previous grants. Again, what we're going to look at is those three contracts, and having gotten in, not only spent it, but also remember drawing it down, doing the paperwork with us before the NOFA application due date, which is what counts, April 9th. By that time, you will have had to have submitted your valid project setup and completion reports and drawdowns and stuff like that. When we're looking at the numbers, at the time you're filling out your app, it's going to, in eCivis, it's going to ask you how much have you expended, and it refers you to the definition of expended in the NOFA, which refers you to the fact that you've got to have demonstrated to HCD that you either have laid out the funds and drawn them down for first-time homebuyer and OOR, and maybe for TBRA, but also for TBRA, if you have valid forward commitments you can make under the contract, so it's got time left in it, it supports the remaining 6 months on the contract, and that money's all committed out, we count those forward commitments under that contract, under the time period that's left, as expenditures for those purposes. So that's where what we need to do, Jose, is get with you, look at your actual scenario, and we can kind of guide you through what that looks like.
Okay, and it looks like the last question is more of a statement. It just seems like 2.5% general admin isn't nearly enough for general admin for a 3-year period. Basically, that's $12,500 for a $500,000 grant.
Okay, Nikki, I'd like you to address that, please, because I don't make the rules, I just administer them.
And that we're just kind of in the same boat. So we acknowledge that our general admin assistance for our grantees is not going to cover all of your expenses to operate your program. And when you submit your application, you do have to submit a budget, or should be submitting a budget that demonstrates that you have sufficient capacity to cover the additional expenses through other funding sources.
We do that at general setup conditions time. I don't think we call for that at application time, but that's always the idea, is you've got to know how you're going to pay for the program, given what we offer in that regard. So that might mean that the general fund is going to continue to pay for a portion of the time that you're spending part-time or full-time on home if our money's not enough. So there's no guarantee that we give you enough admin funds so that this is a self-sufficient program that will never pull from your city or county's general fund. We're short on time, so yeah, so we're done with questions, right,
yeah.
Nikki?
I think we're done with questions, so you can move on.
We have 25 minutes left. I don't intend to keep you long, so let's play a speed round. Just a second. Okay, so application review. When we're looking at it, we have what we call threshold requirements. And so in the state home regs, it talks about minimum requirements. This is to say, if we get your application, you have to satisfy these things, or else we have to, so to speak, throw out your application. Basically, tell you, sorry, we can't award you, here's why. So make sure that you're good on all these scores, and then you can be fairly confident that you'll get what you asked for. So your application has to be received by the deadline. And by the way, eCivis will shut off the portal on the application due date. So if you try to submit a day late, then it won't let you. You have to be an eligible applicant. So that's on our NOFA Appendix A that I've mentioned several times, list of state home eligible jurisdictions. It has to be an eligible activity. So thinking of, let's say, Chodos, if you try to apply for a program, infill new construction to be specific, and it's in, let's say, San Jose or Stockton or San Francisco or Sacramento or all these other places that goes, or LA, that go straight to HUD for their funding alone or with others, that's not an eligible activity because it's not in a state home eligible area. Okay, it has to be an eligible use of funds. Our forms are pretty good at keeping you within those guardrails. I don't think you're going to be trying to apply or submitting an application for something that's not state home eligible for program activities. And your application has to be complete. And again, we're going to mark a bunch of fields as mandatory in eCivis to where you can't submit your app until you address each and every one of those mandatory. A lot of times it's uploads. Sometimes it's after a download, you fill it out, you upload it. That upload has to have been done before your app can be submitted in eCivis. You can't have any unresolved audit findings pursuant to the state home regs. The devil's kind of in the details there, so I'll leave it at that. Most of you are okay, I think, on this front. You have to be compliant. We've talked about this, so one more time, with submittal requirements of 2 CFR section 200.512, please acquaint yourself with it. It essentially says if you spent $750,000 or more of federal funds not just home funds in a given fiscal year, then you owe essentially 9 months later by March 31st, so that's coming up in a month and a half, a single audit to the Federal Clearinghouse. And as I understand it, your responsibility is also to advise the State Controller's Office, there's that SCO again, of having done so, because they keep track and they get involved in any things that the audit says. The applicant is responsible for verifying submission status with SCO, and if you're exempt, you got to upload an eCivis, a copy of your exemption letter. That's always been the case. If you're not exempt, then you're going to upload your single audit with your eCivis application, and that's new. Nikki, I have a question for you. Do you feel like that needs to include some sort of evidence of, so giving us a copy of your single audit's one thing, but I think we need evidence that it was actually submitted to the Federal Clearinghouse and or the State Controller's Office. Do you have a comment on that?
We can verify with the clearinghouse, the Federal Clearinghouse, if it's been received or not. So,
okay.
So, but we do want a copy of that
Yes.
Audit report.
Okay. And you can't be on the federal list of debarred contractors. I've never had anyone fail threshold on that basis for cities and counties. I think that could more easily happen to a developer in this world than a city or a county. I'm not sure. Other minimum requirements, the amount of funds requested must be between the minimum and maximum. This year, that's 500 minimum for everyone, and a lot of your maximums are going to be 500,000. We talked about when it could be more. Your application forms can't be modified. And so if you download a form from eCivis and you somehow manage to modify it and upload it, that could cause a problem. Hopefully not. If you're a CHOTO, you have to demonstrate project control up front, and that's tricky when you're talking about proposing a program. So we can talk about that too offline. The 50% rule, again, if there's been anything anyone's failed on, it's been either the single audit or this generally. So this just, once in a while, we see jurisdictions who apply and yet they've not met the 50% expenditure requirement for currently open home program activities contracts. And it's important here, that's as of the application due date. So you could conceivably apply shortly, knowing that you're about to give us drawdown requests and such before April 9th. That's fine if you're knowing that you're going to be able to give us valid draw requests and meet the 50% rule. But yeah, just make sure, just know that's a requirement to keep going. So there's the 50% rule. All valid draws or for TBRA project setup reports that are basically tied to remaining time left on your, let's say, 2019 grant, which runs through October for all of you, etc. How many draws or evidence did we get by the application deadline from you is what we look at as your expenditures. And we measure that against your original awards for the contracts in question, and we do the math. Did they spend at least 50% of this? For first-time home buyer, OOR, again, it's a valid draw for work that's been completed. So for first-time home buyer, that means escrow must have closed and you must have funded it. For OOR, the work completed is the amount of construction and rehab payments made are for work completed and expected. There's no advances going on. You can't do that. It's always, you never pay for something that's not yet been done. For TBRA, rental assistance amount multiplied by the number of months left in their agreement is how we kind of look at work completed. Again, has to be under the grant in question. If you got a bunch of PI on hand that's old, that's going to pay for the TBRA. You can't say your 2019 grant's going to pay for it. And then you just add all the awards, divide by 2, and that's how much must be expended. Rating and ranking. So, like I mentioned, in the, I think, unlikely event that this becomes oversubscribed and thus competitive, that's the only time where these points would actually matter. We don't have a minimum scoring requirement in programs. I believe they still have one in projects. we don't have one in programs. So this might all be a moot point, but I can't guarantee that. So 950 points are possible. Starts with the local housing element. If you're in compliance by the day after the application due date, you get 50 points. Otherwise, you get 0. So check your housing element compliance status if you're unsure. And here's who you'd check it with. Paul McDougall. Is he still there, Nikki? Or did we need to update this slide? Sorry. You're muted, Nikki. Sorry.
Paul is still with Housing Policy Division. I am not sure if he's the one that we would check with, but if you email him, he will certainly refer you to the correct person.
And I assume that URL at the bottom is still valid. So that might be the more make sense way. And it's look at your NOFA. I think we will have made sure that that link is good. I don't think I remembered to double check and make sure that matches the NOFA. So sorry, but everybody can go to the NOFA. It's on our home webpage right now. Go to, search for housing element or scroll down to it. There'll be a link. You can just kind of self-help yourself there on the housing element status. There should still be something that's kind of publicly facing to let you see yours and maybe everyone else's housing element status. I think it's public information. So take care of that. Again, take care of it anyway, even if we're not in points. You want to be compliant with this for other reasons. In the rare event that a jurisdiction kind of like has direct home HUD funding and then comes to us and brings money with them as a result to our NOFA, we give them 50 points for the trouble. Really rare. And this only applies to those who were recently kind of in business directly with HUD and now they're suddenly coming to the state, but there's other conditions to meet, where they jump out of a consortium or urban county agreement, that sort of thing. Rural communities. So if you are determined to be rural based on we run you through some paces on a worksheet and it documents and spits out whether you're rural or not. It might surprise you. More areas might be rural than what you would think. Depends where the proposed activities are, but you submit our document that says, yep, they're rural, you get 50 points. Otherwise, 0. Your applicant experience looks at two different things. How much experience do you have administering home and/or other qualified affordable housing programs that are the same as what you're applying for? So for example, first-time home buyer, well, we haven't done it with home, but we've done lots with CalHome and/or CDBG or some other program I haven't heard of. Like, you can list those as same experience and we will count those. So part of what we're asking you here is, what do you experience you have that matches up with that particular sub-application for first-time home buyer? Okay, now we're asking you what all other experience you have with home or any other programs that might be, something other than first-time home buyer in this example. And we let you stack those up. And we're looking for like basically 7 years or 7 units to get maximum points. So 100 points are available. If you have no experience, then or no same experience, especially, you won't get that many points. Hopefully points won't matter this time around once again. Okay. Another factor for 50 points is your reporting history. So the last 3 home annual performance reports, the quarterly performance reports that were owed for your 16-home through 19-home program activities contracts. So that triggers QPIRs and quarterly performance reports, QPRs. So we're looking for you to upload evidence of submittals of those and to support how you fill out our worksheet. And also your program income. Okay, that was quarterly performance reports. Your quarterly PI, that should have said quarterly program income statements. So again, those are the 2 things, all for the same 3 contract years. And as owed by program income statements for all home contracts, not just programs, but also projects. Both of them trigger program income statements, not just program contracts. That's why these are on different bullets. And points are deducted if late or not received for each of these. If you have non-compliance with monitoring or contract requirements from over the last 5 years, you could lose up to 100 points. This is pretty rare. This is not like we had a finding, so you're losing points. It's we had a finding and we're trying to engage with you and get you to do something, recommended actions, and you just aren't, you could lose points. Community need. This is kind of a biggie. So we have this Appendix C of the NOFA. It's based on US Census data, and you're just going to, you can preview this if you want, but it is what it is. This could possibly, if in a competitive year, I would say maybe you think about strategizing towards whatever scores you the most community need points. But in a double NOFA year with all this money, I think if I were working in a city, I would just roll with whatever I wanted to do and let the points fall where they may, hoping that points just don't matter. And so that lets you look behind the curtain as to how we score these up based on what you're applying for. Appendix C, it's currently on below our NOFA and below Appendix A on our NOFA part of our home webpage. Project feasibility. So you get up to 75 points total, and we sort of prorate them amongst the activities if you're doing multiple activities. But for first-time home buyer, we make sure there's a healthy ratio between how many proposed units you want to do over those 3 years you'd have a contract versus how many units sold at or below the sample price you put into that worksheet over the last 12 months. What we're trying to do is make sure that you're not trying to capture 75, 100% of the market based on the last 12 months. Like, you know, you're only going to get a certain part of the market share. So your worksheet needs to demonstrate that. Owner occupied rehab, this is all based on those community needs scores. So it is what it is kind of thing. And there's points associated with owner occupied and TBRA, strictly based on that. There's no work for you to do here, no worksheet, unlike first time home buyer. And we just have you, we used to have you submit sample proposed program guidelines, and it was the Wild West when I showed up here a long time ago, because people had all kinds of ideas what program guidelines look like. So we locked them down probably at least 10 years ago. I said, no, start with ours. They're locked into track changes. And all you have to do at NOFA application time is say, check the box. This is the easiest one of all. It's a gimme. We're going to use, we understand we have to start with your guidelines. You get your 25 points just for submitting that form that says we get it. This is where the higher expenditure rates come back into play. They actually are not only worth higher possible awards, but also extra points if you're a great recent spender. Okay, so what I didn't put on here was the contract years in question, but the prior slides talk about that again, the 16, 18, and 19 dash home. You might say, what happened to 17? And the answer, it was a double NOFA. So those contract numbers for the 17 and 18 HUD grants that we did were called 18-home dash da 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 da. So that's what I mean by 18-home. So this just points tied to that success. And then we have this, there's a worksheet you'll fill out, and here's the deal. If you look at the worksheet, you'll discover that the only way to get these points is to apply for TBRA, because that's the only way to reach any of the other two criteria, which is to help people out of homelessness, because you don't do that through rehabbing a house because they don't own a house. And maybe somebody can correct me on this at some point, but I don't think you take someone from homelessness and take them into home ownership. I think there's always an interim step of a shelter and or a rental situation. That can be talked about, but that's worth 110 points as well. And that's on the same worksheet as the expenditure rates, by the way. So this might be, Nikki, I think sort of the near the end of the road. Yeah. So time for the last questions, and it looks like we'll be wrapping up right by 12 as promised.
Okay, we have 5 questions in the queue.
Okay.
One would you provide an example of calculating the 50% rule for 2 or more open contracts? Is this 50% of the total value of all open contracts?
Right. So keeping in mind the definitions we used where you have given to us by the deadline, drawdown request, valid drawdown request by the application due date, right? April 9th, or evidence of valid forward TBRA commitments that your contract will pay for. Okay, keeping all that in mind, if you get, let's say, a hypothetical example, an 18-home contract that's still current as of the application due date, and a 19, and each was 500,000. So now that's $1 million together. And so collectively, not individually, but collectively, that's $1 million. Collectively, you have to have spent 500,000, even if it was all under 2018 and none under 2019. Doesn't matter to us. Collectively, you had $1 million. You have $1 million. You have to have spent at least 500,000 of that, and that's how we look at the 50% rule for contracts that are still open as of the application due date, still current. I hope that helps.
Okay, the next question, are any of the prior performance reports Factor 1 available to new home applicants?
Okay, so for reporting history, I want to point out everybody starts out with a certain amount of points. So if you don't have a reporting history, you get full points. You can only lose points in this category, and that's for someone who's had a reporting responsibility with us and submitted late or never submitted those particular reports. Those are going to be hits against the, I think it was 50 points baseline. So I think that's should answer your question.
Okay, the next question is, can you repeat what you said about program guidelines? It sounded like grantees are required to submit program guidelines templates provided by HCD with track changes. Is that correct?
And that's not until after you receive an award. So at application time, there's nothing for you to do except say, I acknowledge here that we have to use we have to start with your template. It's essentially what the form says. Once you get awarded, then your rep is going to engage with you about completing your general setup conditions. And one of those will be, okay, you applied for first-time homebuyer. Here's the first-time homebuyer program guidelines, latest and greatest version. Fill them out. It's locked into track changes. Send them back. We'll look at it and we'll either approve it all or approve part and engage with you until we have an acceptable thing, and then we'll approve those for you. So all it is making sure that everybody's got complete, thorough, acceptable guidelines as a baseline, because we're the judge of that basically. And you can propose any and all modifications or changes to those. We just might not accept them all, and we would certainly explain to you why. No, you can't make the debt ratio 50% on first-time home buyer, for example, when it's not responsible to let people spend half of their income on mortgage payments when they are no higher than 80% area median income. Okay, things like that. So there's just places where we draw a line in the sand and say, no, sorry, that's not acceptable.
And the last is a comment. It's a thank you, Jay and Nikki, for a great and helpful presentation, plus answers to the questions raised. And with that, I do want to encourage everybody to complete the survey that will pop up as you exit the Zoom meeting. And with that, thank you to Jay for his very, very thoughtful and thorough presentation. Remember to submit your home program inquiries to the Home NOFA. And Jay has also generously offered to you his home email address for HCD and a telephone number by which to reach him. So if you have any questions, you can reach him by telephone or by email.
And if you want, start with your rep. I mean, don't forget about your reps. They're great, and they know when it's time to come to me and say, Jay, help me with this question from the field. So it's great if you have something that, if you could start there, that kind of cuts down on my volume and they can head some of those off at the pass. So please consider starting there if you know who your rep is and you can see the rep map. If you need to, come straight to me or to the Home NOFA inbox and we'll get you taken care of. We're here to serve you. And we're not setting up pre-defined office hours this year. That was a nightmare to manage last year. We're not doing Eventbrite, all that stuff. We decided to simplify and just kind of do it kind of old school wise and just email us. We'll call you. We'll set up send you a Teams calendar entry, and me, you, and your rep, and whoever else from your team, we'll get together and we'll talk through whatever your question, problem, or issue or concern is.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.